Welcome, the most captivating science fiction stories where mystery, action, and love intertwine are here. Subscribe now and turn on notifications so you never miss an episode. Jake Morrison stood in the cavernous auction bay of Kepler Station, surrounded by the accumulated debris of 1,000 failed dreams. Decommissioned starships sat in neat rows like metallic tombstones, each one representing someone's grand adventure that had ended in bankruptcy, legal trouble, or simple bad luck. The air recyclers struggled against the smell of oxidized metal and desperation, creating a cocktail that Jake had come to associate with good business opportunities. Lot 73, announced the auctioneer, a bored-looking android whose voice modulator had seen better decades. Mid-range cargo transport, designation stellar drift, previous owner defaulted on licensing fees. Bidding starts at 5,000 credits. Jake studied the vessel through his bio-enhanced vision, cataloging potential salvage values with practiced efficiency. The ship was a classic Meridian-class freighter, maybe 30 years old, with the kind of reliable bones that made scrapping profitable. The hull showed standard wear patterns, the engine nacelles were intact, and the life support systems appeared functional if outdated. Nothing remarkable, which was exactly what Jake preferred in his purchases. "Do I hear 5,000? The android droned. Jake raised his hand lazily, already calculating profit margins. The Meridian class had excellent resale value for its component parts. The fusion cores alone would fetch enough to cover his bid, and the navigation computers were still compatible with newer ship designs. A few other salvagers showed interest, but Jake had been working these auctions for 23 years. He knew when to bid and when to walk away. 12,000, going once, going twice. The auctioneer's gavel fell with a satisfying thunk. Sold to bidder 47. Jake collected his purchase documentation and transfer codes, feeling the familiar satisfaction of a good deal. The stellar drift was his now, officially and legally, which meant he had exactly 48 hours to strip anything valuable before the station charged him docking fees that would eat into his profit margin. The walk to docking bay 94 took him through the station's commercial sector, past vendors hawking everything from Rigelian silk to military-grade plasma conduits. Jake ignored the familiar chaos, his mind already focused on the systematic deconstruction awaiting him. He developed his salvage technique over decades of practice. Start with the most valuable components, work efficiently, and always leave the hulk in better condition than legally required. Professional pride, Elena used to call it, back when he'd had someone who cared about his professional pride. The stellar drift sat in its assigned berth like a sleeping giant, its hull plates dulled by years of hyperspace travel and cosmic radiation. Jake activated his portable scanner and began his preliminary inspection, walking slowly around the vessel while his equipment painted detailed readouts across his vision. Standard construction, no obvious battle damage, life support systems showing green across the board. The previous owner had taken reasonable care of the ship before whatever financial disaster had forced them to surrender it. Jake palmed the access panel and felt the ship's computer system acknowledge his new ownership status. The airlock cycled with a soft hiss, and he stepped aboard for the first time, breathing recycled air that carried hints of ozone and something vaguely organic. Probably just the smell of old air filters, though he made a mental note to check the atmospheric processors first. The ship's layout was standard for its class, central corridor connecting bridge, crew quarters, galley, and cargo bay, with engineering sections tucked into the lower levels. Jake's scanner showed normal readings throughout most of the vessel, which was both reassuring and slightly disappointing. He'd been hoping for some exotic modifications that might increase the salvage value. The bridge revealed the usual collection of outdated but functional equipment. Navigation computers hummed quietly to themselves, displaying star charts that were only slightly out of date. The captain's chair showed where patterns suggesting someone had spent long hours seated there, staring out at the infinite darkness between stars. Jake had occupied similar chairs himself, back when he'd been hauling cargo instead of dismantling other people's dreams. "Right then," he said aloud, his voice echoing in the empty space. "Let's see what you're hiding." The scanner showed interesting readings from the cargo bay. Not the empty void he'd expected, but complex patterns that suggested significant electronic equipment. Jake made his way aft, wondering if the previous owner had left behind some valuable cargo that hadn't been mentioned in the auction documentation. Finding unexpected treasure wasn't unheard of in the salvage business, though it usually came with complications he preferred to avoid. The cargo bay doors opened to reveal a space that had been heavily modified from its original configuration. Instead of open storage area, someone had installed environmental pods, power routing stations, and what appeared to be a small workshop area. The modifications were professional quality, suggesting significant investment in making this space livable for extended periods. Jake's scanner began chirping with increasing urgency as it detected readings that didn't match standard cargo vessel specifications. The atmospheric composition showed elevated oxygen levels. The temperature controls were set for human comfort rather than cargo preservation, and the power distribution patterns indicated active life support systems throughout areas that should have been dormant. "That's odd," he muttered, studying the readouts more carefully. The modifications weren't just professional, they were recent. Someone had been maintaining these systems, keeping them operational long after the ship's official decommissioning. A soft sound from deeper in the cargo bay made him freeze. The scanner's audio pickups were enhanced for detecting structural weaknesses and failing components, but what he just heard sounded distinctly biological. Jake drew his plasma cutter, not because he expected violence, but because 23 years of salvage work had taught him that surprising situations required careful handling. Another sound, clearer this time, definitely organic and definitely not rats. Someone or something was aboard his ship, hiding in the modified cargo sections like stowaways who'd missed the memo about change of ownership. Jake activated his suit's communication system and broadcast on standard frequencies. "This is Jake Morrison, legal owner of this vessel. If anyone is aboard, please identify yourself. I'm not looking for trouble, but I need to know who's sharing my salvage." Silence stretched long enough that Jake began to wonder if his audio pickups were malfunctioning. Then, from somewhere behind the environmental processors, came a voice so quiet he almost missed it. "Please," the voice said, speaking accented standard galactic with the careful pronunciation of someone for whom it wasn't a first language. "We mean no harm. We will leave if you wish." Jake felt something twist in his chest. A combination of irritation at the complication and unexpected sympathy for whoever was desperate enough to hide aboard a decommissioned freighter. He'd spent enough years working the edges of civilized space to recognize the sound of people who had run out of options. "We," he called back, keeping his voice gentle despite his growing confusion. "How many of you are there?" A pause, then the same voice, even quieter. "Two. Myself and my son. We have nowhere else to go." Jake holstered his plasma cutter and moved deeper into the cargo bay, following the source of the voice through a maze of modified equipment that spoke of careful planning and desperate improvisation. Behind a cluster of atmospheric processors, he found them. A woman and child huddled together in a makeshift shelter constructed from cargo containers and emergency life support modules. The woman was clearly Centaurian, her blue-tinted skin marked with the intricate silver patterns that identified her clan lineage. She couldn't have been more than 30 standard years, but her eyes held the kind of exhaustion that came from carrying burdens too heavy for any one person. Her arms were wrapped protectively around a boy who appeared to be about 6 years old, his features an intriguing blend of Centaurian and human ancestry. "Please don't call security," she said quietly, her accent lending a musical quality to the words. "I know we have no right to be here, but we needed time to figure out what to do next. Jake Morrison stood in the cavernous auction bay of Kepler Station, surrounded by the accumulated debris of 1,000 failed dreams. Decommissioned starships sat in neat rows like metallic tombstones, each one representing someone's grand adventure that had ended in bankruptcy, legal trouble, or simple bad luck. The air recyclers struggled against the smell of oxidized metal and desperation, creating a cocktail that Jake had come to associate with good business opportunities. Lot 73, announced the auctioneer, a bored-looking android whose voice modulator had seen better decades. Mid-range cargo transport, designation stellar drift, previous owner defaulted on licensing fees. Bidding starts at 5,000 credits. Jake studied the vessel through his bio-enhanced vision, cataloging potential salvage values with practiced efficiency. The ship was a classic Meridian-class freighter, maybe 30 years old, with the kind of reliable bones that made scrapping profitable. The hull showed standard wear patterns, the engine nacelles were intact, and the life support systems appeared functional if outdated. Nothing remarkable, which was exactly what Jake preferred in his purchases. "Do I hear 5,000? The android droned. Jake raised his hand lazily, already calculating profit margins. The Meridian class had excellent resale value for its component parts. The fusion cores alone would fetch enough to cover his bid, and the navigation computers were still compatible with newer ship designs. A few other salvagers showed interest, but Jake had been working these auctions for 23 years. He knew when to bid and when to walk away. 12,000, going once, going twice. The auctioneer's gavel fell with a satisfying thunk. Sold to bidder 47. Jake collected his purchase documentation and transfer codes, feeling the familiar satisfaction of a good deal. The stellar drift was his now, officially and legally, which meant he had exactly 48 hours to strip anything valuable before the station charged him docking fees that would eat into his profit margin. The walk to docking bay 94 took him through the station's commercial sector, past vendors hawking everything from Rigelian silk to military-grade plasma conduits. Jake ignored the familiar chaos, his mind already focused on the systematic deconstruction awaiting him. He developed his salvage technique over decades of practice. Start with the most valuable components, work efficiently, and always leave the hulk in better condition than legally required. Professional pride, Elena used to call it, back when he'd had someone who cared about his professional pride. The stellar drift sat in its assigned berth like a sleeping giant, its hull plates dulled by years of hyperspace travel and cosmic radiation. Jake activated his portable scanner and began his preliminary inspection, walking slowly around the vessel, while Jake's workshop occupied a hollowed-out asteroid in the Vega Drift, officially classified as a private mining claim that hadn't produced anything valuable in decades. The reality was more complicated. Jake had spent years converting the natural caverns into a sophisticated operation that could handle everything from basic repairs to complete ship reconstruction. It was the perfect place for someone who valued privacy over convenience. Zara stood in the main workshop bay, her silver markings brightening with what Jake had learned to recognize as Centaurian amazement. Kael had already disappeared into the maze of equipment and half-disassembled starships, his delighted laughter echoing from somewhere near a partially gutted scout vessel. "This is incredible," Zara said, running her hand along a precision plasma cutter that probably cost more than most people's annual income. "You have fabrication equipment that most colonial shipyards would envy." 23 years of strategic acquisitions, Jake replied with satisfaction. "Every time I salvaged something particularly interesting, I kept the best pieces. After a while, it adds up to something respectable." The asteroid's living quarters were more modest but comfortable. 2 bedrooms carved from natural rock, a common area that doubled as dining room and entertainment center, and a kitchen that Jake had rarely used for anything more elaborate than reheating ration packs. Seeing Zara examine the space with the eye of someone planning to make it home, Jake realized how empty the place had felt during his years of solitary residence. "Mama, look." Kael's voice carried from the workshop, followed by the distinctive whine of a gravity manipulator activating. "I can make things float." "Kael, please do not touch anything that might explode," Zara called back, though her tone carried more resignation than real concern. She turned to Jake with an apologetic expression. "He is very curious about mechanical things." "Good thing," Jake said. "Curiosity is the most important tool in any workshop. Though we should probably establish some basic safety protocols before he discovers the antimatter containment units." They spent the next few hours establishing routines that would allow three strangers to share a confined space without driving each other insane. Jake was surprised to discover that Zara's technical expertise extended far beyond basic ship maintenance. She had formal training in quantum engineering and interstellar communications, skills that had apparently been wasted on whatever diplomatic mission had brought her to human space. "My husband thought it would be useful for me to understand the technical aspects of interplanetary commerce," she explained as she examined Jake's communication array. "He said too many diplomats made agreements about things they did not actually comprehend." "Smart man," Jake said, then immediately regretted the comment as Zara's expression grew distant. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to." "It is acceptable," she said quietly. "Marcus was smart, too smart perhaps for his own safety." Jake filed away the name and the implication for future consideration. Zara's husband had clearly stumbled onto something that had gotten him killed, and whatever it was had been dangerous enough to force his widow and son into exile. The responsible thing would be to ask for details, but Jake had spent enough years on the galaxy's fringes to know that some knowledge came with costs he wasn't prepared to pay. The first few days passed in relative peace as they established a working relationship that benefited everyone involved. Zara's engineering skills proved invaluable for maintaining the asteroid's complex systems, while Kael's boundless energy found productive outlets in helping with simple repair tasks. Jake discovered that he enjoyed having people around, though he'd never have admitted it out loud. The peace shattered on their fourth day when Jake's long-range scanners detected incoming ships that weren't broadcasting standard identification codes. 3 vessels, military configuration, moving with the purposeful precision that suggested they weren't just passing through the drift. "Zara," Jake called, his voice carefully controlled. "I need you and Kael in the secure compartment. Now." She appeared instantly, Kael close behind, both of them recognizing the urgency in his tone. "What is happening?" "Company," Jake said grimly, watching the tactical display as the unknown ships moved to surround his asteroid. "The kind that probably isn't here to discuss salvage contracts." The communication system crackled to life, filling the workshop with an authoritative voice that carried the unmistakable tone of corporate security. "Asteroid designation KL 447, this is Cortec Industries security vessel retribution. You are harboring stolen corporate property. Prepare for boarding and inspection." Jake felt his blood run cold. Cortec Industries was one of the largest mining conglomerates in human space, with enough political influence to make laws inconvenient rather than binding. If they were here, it meant Zara's situation was far more complicated than a simple diplomatic incident. "Zara," he said quietly, "is there something you haven't told me about your husband's work?" Her face went pale, and Jake saw fear replace the growing confidence she'd been developing over the past few days. Marcus was investigating illegal mining operations on several worlds. He believed Cortec was using diplomatic immunity to circumvent environmental regulations. He had gathered evidence. What kind of evidence? Financial records, communication intercepts, survey data that proved they were strip mining protected areas. Zara's voice grew smaller as she spoke. "He hid copies of everything before he died. I thought they were destroyed when I fled, but..." "But," Jake prompted, though he was beginning to suspect he already knew the answer. Kael stepped forward, pulling a small data crystal from his pocket with the air of a child sharing a treasured secret. "Papa told me to keep this safe for Mama," he said proudly. "I hid it really good so the bad people couldn't find it." Jake stared at the crystal, understanding flooding through him with the weight of inevitability. Marcus Thulvani hadn't just been investigating corporate malfeasance. He'd been gathering evidence that could bring down one of the most powerful companies in human space. And his son had been carrying that evidence for weeks, hidden aboard a salvage vessel that Jake had bought by random chance. "Well," Jake said after a long moment, "that explains why they're being so persistent." The communication system crackled again. "KL 447, you have 60 seconds to respond before we begin boarding procedures. Interference with corporate security operations is a federal offense." Jake looked at Zara and Kael, seeing his own determination reflected in their faces despite their fear. The smart thing would be to hand them over, claim ignorance, and hope Cortex's legal department didn't decide to make him disappear as a potential witness. But Jake had spent too many years watching powerful people crush anyone who stood in their way. "Counteroffer," he broadcast on all frequencies. "This is a licensed salvage operation on private property. Any attempt to board without proper warrants will be reported to the Galactic Trade Commission as corporate harassment of legitimate business operations." The silence that followed stretched long enough for Jake to wonder if he just signed all their death warrants. Then a new voice came through the speakers, colder and more dangerous than the first. "Mr. Morrison, I presume you're harboring fugitives wanted in connection with theft of corporate intellectual property. Return them peacefully, and we'll overlook your involvement in this matter." Jake activated his own ship's defensive systems, feeling the familiar hum of charged weapon arrays coming online. "I'm harboring refugees fleeing persecution. Big difference, legally speaking. And since when does Cortec Industries get to define theft?" The response was immediate and uncompromising. "Since we started writing the laws, Mr. Morrison, last chance." Jake's asteroid workshop had been designed with siege scenarios in mind, a paranoid precaution that was finally proving its worth. The defensive systems came online with practiced efficiency: particle shields, automated weapon platforms, and communication scramblers that would make it extremely difficult for Cortec to call for reinforcements without revealing their illegal operation to monitoring stations throughout the sector. "Mr. Morrison," came the cold voice of the Cortec commander, "you're prolonging the inevitable. We have legal authority to recover stolen corporate property." "Funny thing about legal authority," Jake replied, settling into his command chair while Zara and Kael huddled in the secure compartment behind him. "I've been checking the registry, and Cortec Industries doesn't have jurisdiction over this sector. In fact, your vessels are operating outside their authorized patrol areas." The silence that followed was telling. Jake had spent years navigating the complex web of corporate territories and legal jurisdictions that governed the Outer Rim. Cortec's security forces were powerful within their sphere of influence, but they'd overreached by pursuing Zara into independent space. "You're splitting hairs," the commander said finally. "The fugitives you're harboring possess stolen data that belongs to Cortec Industries. The refugees I'm protecting possess evidence of corporate malfeasance that belongs in the hands of proper authorities," Jake countered. "There's a difference, though I understand why you might find that distinction inconvenient." Jake activated his quantum communication array and began broadcasting on multiple frequencies, sending encrypted messages to contacts throughout the salvage network. Within minutes, responses began flowing back, offers of support from fellow salvagers who had their own reasons to distrust corporate security forces. "You know what I love about the salvage business?" Jake continued conversationally, watching his tactical display as more friendly signals appeared at the edge of sensor range. "It's taught me that one person's trash is another person's treasure. And right now, I'm thinking the evidence your people are so eager to recover might be very valuable to the right buyers. You're making a serious mistake, Morrison. Maybe. But here's the thing. I've been making mistakes for 53 years, and most of them have worked out better than my good decisions. Jake's fingers danced over his communication controls, uploading the contents of Marcus Thulvani's data crystal to secured servers throughout the sector. For instance, about 30 seconds ago, I made the mistake of transmitting copies of some very interesting financial records to the Galactic Trade Commission, the Independent Mining Union, and several news organizations that specialize in corporate accountability. The reaction was immediate and explosive. Cortex lead vessel opened fire, plasma bolts hammering against Jake's defensive shields in a display of corporate frustration that proved they'd abandoned any pretense of legal authority. The asteroid's automated systems responded with prejudice, filling space around the attacking ships with defensive fire that forced them to break off their attack run. "Well," Jake said, watching his shields absorb the punishment while returning fire with interest, "I guess we're past the negotiation phase." Behind him, he could hear Zara speaking softly to Kael in their native language, probably explaining why the nice man who'd given them shelter was now engaged in a running space battle with corporate security forces. Jake found himself hoping the boy would remember this as an adventure rather than trauma, though he supposed that distinction depended largely on whether they all survived the next few minutes. "Jake," Zara's voice came over the internal communication system, "I can help. My husband taught me about corporate security protocols. There are weaknesses we can exploit." "I'm listening," Jake replied, dodging another plasma salvo while his own weapons carved glowing tracks across the lead attacker's hull. "Cortex security operates under strict profit-loss calculations. If you can make this operation cost more than recovering the data is worth, they will withdraw and try a different approach. Any suggestions for running up their expenses?" "Damage to corporate vessels requires extensive paperwork and investigation. If you can disable rather than destroy, it creates bureaucratic complications that their commanders will want to avoid." Jake grinned, adjusting his targeting systems to focus on propulsion and communication arrays rather than life support systems. "I like how you think. Kael, you